It's lovely to be here. This is my first time at Viva, and I'm so grateful to have been invited. It just tied in, it was meant to happen. I was invited to London to do some work there, and then within a week or two of that invitation was invited to come to Viva. And I'd been hearing such wonderful stories about this event, that it was relaxed and laid back, and that you had siestas in the afternoon, and I thought, I'm in, count me in, I love me siestas. So I thought that sounded really good. And I wasn't sure, time-wise, there was 2 weeks between the last speaking engagement I had in London and then coming here to Albir. And it turned out that after talking with my husband and a few other people, they said, why don't you just stay and go directly from London to Albir and have some time off? So I did. I had 2 weeks in Calpe where I rested after a very busy time in London and also worked on my new book. And my heart is full. I was so moved by what I experienced meeting new people and familiar faces in London, and what I discovered, what was fresh for me, Julian, was there are no strangers. Once again, I just saw how we're all connected, whether you're speaking with an Uber driver or a waiter who photobombed Sue and Sheila and myself over a very enjoyable lunch. There's just no strangers, because the waiter started talking about languages he'd learned, 4 or 5 languages. He's from Romania. And I said to him, how do you learn so many languages? And he said, well, it's just all the way you think about it. And the three of us, Sheila and Sue and I, just looked at one another. It's like, whether you know the principles or not, so many of us have an inkling there's something there. I love this. I really got a chance to read this brochure last night and again this morning. It's one of the best. It's profound, it's simple, it's pure. I love the very first sentence where you say the Viva Event celebrates our lives, our hearts and minds, our human form and formless spirit. And I thought, ladies, you didn't hold back. You didn't hold back, and I applaud you for that. And that's what touched me so deeply. Chills. I get chills as I think about that, because why is that important for us to know that we're human beings and we're spiritual beings? Is because we've got so much more within us than what we think we have. I never knew this. I didn't have a clue. My life was so operated from the outside in. That's normal. It was my normality in those days. And it was Sid's normal attitude toward life. It was like, life's not so good. He was adopted and brought up in a family that weren't particularly kind or loving or tender, and had a bit of a dicey childhood. And he shared stories with us before he had his profound enlightenment. So, we knew that. And part of why we got along so well is because we were in complete accord with our insecurity and with our attitude that life's not so great. And we would do the best we could with the hand that life dealt us, but it wasn't much of a hand. And so that was how we became best friends, was with that attitude underlying our friendship. Ain't it awful? And then what did the man do? But just like out of the blue, he has this incredible but simple, he always said, simple experience where he realized there was something deeper to life, where 3 or 4 days after this experience, he said to us when he arrived in our home, "I found the secret to life." He said, I know what God is. And he looked right at me and said, "And it's not what you think it is." Well, it was a little unnerving, I must say, because this is a welder talking to me about God. And I really didn't see the connection between being a welder and having the ability or the authority to talk about God. Like, overnight, where did that come from? How could he possibly say things like that? So, because he was dear to us and his wife Barb was dear to us, we listened to him, but our eyebrows were rising as we listened to him because, we just couldn't believe what he was saying. But there was such a physical change in him. So on one hand, this old saying about seeing is believing. We saw the physical change in him, how he carried himself with authority, with confidence, with presence. Like, I didn't know what presence was in those days. I didn't know even what confidence was because I was full of insecurity. But it's like the inner me sensed, wow, he's got something happened to him. But then he would talk weird, like all this stuff about it's just thought, Elsie. Insecurity is just thought. Well, really, Sid, really? That doesn't look that way to me. It doesn't feel that way to me. We're still struggling to meet the mortgage payment. How is that insecurity? I mean, that's real. Get a grip, Sid, is what I thought. Get a grip. And so I just thought, well, I'll wait for this to be over. And when he and Barb left and went on their way home, I said to Ken, that's poor dear man. I think there's something going on. He may be having a breakdown or something. It'll pass. Well, it didn't. And in those days, it was like, unfortunately, it didn't pass. And our friend was no longer the same person we knew. And to top it off, his wife, my best friend, went into his camp. It's like, how can that be? He's brainwashed her, is what I thought. He's brainwashed her. Because for a while, maybe, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after Sid's experience, even though Barb was in the room, in their home on Salt Spring, when he had this incredible experience happen to him where he felt he was enveloped in this pure, blinding light. And that's all I'll say. If you want to hear any more from the man himself, it's on tape, and you can see it on 3PGC website, and it's called The Experience. So Barb was in the room when it happened. She didn't see any blinding white light, but she felt something. She felt the energy. She didn't know what it was because we didn't talk about things like that. We didn't talk about blinding white light. We didn't talk about insight. We didn't talk about profundity. We were practical, down to earth unions. How are we going to meet our monthly bills? Can we afford to buy a steak this week, or is it hamburger? Like that kind of stuff. So who talked about thought creating reality? Who talked about consciousness and awareness of our spiritual being? Who talked about mind, which is another word for God or spiritual essence or whatever word you want to put on it? We didn't talk about things like that. And now all of a sudden he's talking weird, like that. But there's a feeling I can't deny, and it didn't go away. The happier and more at peace and the more Sid fell in love with life, the more freaked out I got, until the point after a year and a half, I thought, that's it. I really don't want to see that couple again. Because of all things, after being married for they might have been married 15 or 16 years, and Ken and I about the same length of time. And Sid and Barb were having some marital difficulties at that time, as were Ken and I, just no big deal, but, just kind of underlying currents of dissatisfaction. And now all of a sudden they're walking around like they're on a honeymoon. They're holding hands. They're looking at each other with love in their eyes. Like, how dare they? How dare they? I'm still looking at Ken with not a lot of love in my eyes. I'm looking at him when he comes in from his work at the pulp mill, and he's got, dirty coveralls and burnt holes in his coveralls from welding rods and things. It's like, gosh, Ken, can't you stay a little further away from the welding machine so you don't get all burnt up and all that? Not appreciating him for being a good husband and a father and bringing home a nice paycheck and all that. It was everything that was wrong is what we looked at. And there was Sid now, living and working at the pulp mill for another 10 months after his experience. And what was so fascinating to Ken, again, despite his belief, is that the friends that Sid had were pulling away from him as Sid became more and more rooted in his experience. And a lot of the people that had stayed away from him and were not friends, perhaps even had contentious relationships, were drawing towards Sid, including the plant manager, and asking Sid for private consultation. Like, what's happened to you, man? What's up, Scotty? Like, you seem so different. Has an aunt died and left you money? Is your wife being especially good to you? Like, have you won the lottery? What's up? Why are you so happy? And when the plant manager actually took him to his office and spoke with him for an hour or so, Sid never divulged the content of their conversation. And as a matter of fact, Sid was a little concerned that his supervisor might say, what gives you the right to leave your job, and where were you? And the plant manager assured Sid that he would take care of it. This was an eye-opener for Sid, because Sid's a worker, he's a tradesman. And Sid was also in the Navy for a while in Scotland, and so he knew for the plant manager to come to him and ask to speak with him about life, it would be like the admiral on a ship coming to the cook and saying, hey man, would you talk to me about life? It was unbelievable to Sid. And so during those 10 months while he was still at the pulp mill, these kind of things started to happen to the point where he realized it was time to leave and be in service to the world. And that's when he then moved to Salt Spring permanently. They had a summer cottage there that they would go back and forth. But this was when he decided to leave his work and go to the island. And Ken and I really thought, well, that's it. It's just, he's a sweet man, but he's not very practical. How is he going to live? He's giving up his pension. His pension after being at the pulp mill for 20 years or something like that. And how is he going to live? He has no income. That was really concerning to Ken and I. And it was a bit to his wife as well. But Sid just said, I know it'll come. I know when you're in service, and service is your primary focus, mind will take care of me. Mind will take care of us. And it did. He ended up, when people would start coming down his driveway to speak with him, and he would invite them into his home and talk with them and have a cup of tea and a conversation, and then the crowds get larger and larger, and finally he would have to rent a hall on the island, and he would pay for the hall because he was talking originally to a group of hippies. And a lot of the people some of them were homeless or living in downtrodden conditions. One couple was living in a teepee a couple who the husband had been a well-known attorney in a large city in Canada and became so disillusioned with life that he left his job and went back to the land on Salt Spring. And so these were the people really that Sid started to talk to, was a group of people living an alternative lifestyle. Ken and I stood out a little bit because Ken still had like a job, a regular job. We were a little too clean cut to fit in the hippie era. We really tried. I made dashikas, I sewed dashikas and tie-dyed them. I made wire jewelry. Ken, with his background in welding, did some beautiful artwork out of bronze and silver and things. And we went to craft fairs with other hippies, and we stood out like a sore thumb, We tried our best, and then finally we just thought, okay, let's just be normal. Let's just take our life and be grateful for what we have. It did take some time, even though I saw Sid and Barb as if they were on a honeymoon, and I wanted what they had. It was like the dichotomy of being jealous of what they had and yet yearning for the relationship that was developing and flourishing in their lives. And with their children, seeing this ordinary and yet extraordinary situation develop where their family became a happy family. And I really wanted that in my life. That's the relevance for us as ordinary human beings, is the richness that is waiting for us, and more all the time. I've been a student on this journey for 43, 44 years. Sid had his experience in 1973. And although I fought it hook, line, and sinker for the first while and hid from it, was extremely angry with Sid, literally pushed him out of the house the last time he came to visit, and saw how much in turmoil I was, what angst I was in, and he was just so kind and loving in what he said to me before I pushed him out the door. But something happened, In the midst of my angst, I had an insight. And that's so powerful, again, for humanity to know that insight can happen at any time. I know that we often talk in the community, the principles community, about, if you have a quiet mind and you can nurture insight and so on. And yes, there is a role. That's lovely. People meditate to quieten their mind and so on. But there's also a natural state of meditation that is ours. It's like our spiritual inheritance, this quiet mind. It's what we're born with. And then we take on the norms of society and develop our belief system, and before you know it, the quiet mind is dissipating. But it's still there. That's why this is considered a new paradigm in not just psychology and psychiatry. I've said that for over 40 years. It's a new paradigm in psychology and psychiatry. It's a new paradigm for humanity. That, to me, is also a fresh moment. It's a new paradigm for humanity to look at what's right in our humanness, in our spiritualness, rather than look at what's wrong. It's that simple. It's that simple. When you shift that orientation to what's right, you begin to uncover your true nature. As a matter of fact, to have that shift, your true nature is already being uncovered in order to have that shift. But sometimes, if you're really kind of rooted in your belief system, just being open a tiny little bit to the possibility that this is so, that you do have innate mental health within you, that door has opened a little bit, just that simple consideration. That, to me, is a defining moment in the history of humanity. And I want you to feel that. You know, you can feel the depth of that, the significance of that. I don't say that lightly. From a woman who hid in the loo when Sid came up the driveway at my most traumatic moment, to a woman now standing in front of you saying, this is historic. What we're uncovering here is historic. We're a part of it. And to know that it's spreading around the world in a really beautiful way, where there's still protection, like it's not on BBC, it's not on NBC in America or CBC in Canada. To a large extent, it's still traveling under the radar. And for many, many years, I wondered why. Like, why isn't it exploding in the world today with the help and the results? And at the last conference in London in May, there were 1,000 people present, and I think 36 countries represented from around the world. That's not small potatoes. It's not just being shared in English-speaking countries. It's being shared in multiple languages around the world. Books are being translated into multiple languages around the world. And yet, it's under the radar. What I came to is that it's a beautiful protection. It's a beautiful protection that we still have our lives, that we can live in the richness that we're uncovering as we begin to release our beauty. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think, again, you know, as a woman who's been around for such a long time, an oldie, but I feel a goodie, you know. Simple. Yeah, who said simple? Yeah, simple. I like simple. Sid was very simple spoken. And it's simplicity that oftentimes can be confusing, because our intellect doesn't know how to handle simplicity. I get a sense that sometimes, because of the craziness that's going on in the world and, you know, our various countries, no names mentioned. Somebody asked me in London, is there anybody that you dislike, Elsie? You just seem, you know, so kind-hearted to people. Like, is there anybody you dislike? And I thought for a moment, and I said, there is one person. I won't mention his name. And by the way, I am living in Canada now, you know, not in the US, but I'm still not mentioning any names. But as soon as I said it, I thought, you know, I feel sorry for this particular soul. I feel sorry for him, because I know underneath his facade and what he's doing in the country, he's a lost soul. And I hope, and I send him and his family my love and my earnest compassion that one day he too will see, because beyond his lostness is a soul that is pure. And that's why there are no strangers. There are no strangers. We're all the same underneath our various disguises. And that's a gift. It's a precious gift that wherever you go, we're connected. I've been on my own for 5 weeks, you know, with people a great deal in London. and then having 2 weeks basically on my own in Calpe. And as I was working on my book, I was filled and just, because I hadn't looked at these articles that I've pulled together for quite a while, so it was really new to me. And then it brought more out, more new material just poured out. And I love when that happens, because then I feel I'm not writing. It's the writing is being done for me. And so it was like I got a fresh perspective again, and why I'm coming on so strong about how we're in this living history taking place now. Because it's easy for me to start to take it for granted. It's easy for all of us to start to take it for granted. For me, living on the island with my husband and dear friends that knew Sid and were directly mentored by him, it can be kind of isolated, you know, where life is in such harmony and all that. And it's not that we don't serve and go out into the world and all that, but it's still, until I actually come out again into the world and travel, that I get a deeper understanding again of what's going on in meeting people and feeling people and seeing the power of feeling. And this too is what Sid taught us all about as part of the culture of this new paradigm, is the essential value of deep feelings. For me, it was the difference between shutting Sid out of my life forevermore or being drawn by the depth of his unconditional love that kept me by his side despite my increasing angst. That feeling kept me by his side. Just don't talk to me about what you found. I would say to him over and over, Sid, I asked you not to talk about this. But he said, dearie, you asked a question. And I'd be so caught up in my distress that I wouldn't even know I was asking him a question. You know, it was like there was something else coming out of me. That was my spiritual nature asking a question. But my intellect was saying, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. My disbelief in that year and a half was so solid. I was sharing with Sue and Sheila yesterday. Sue actually brought it up because she'd heard Sid talk about this. I remember when Sid and Barb dropped by my place and Ken was at work. And I said, so what you been up to? And Sid said, do you really want to know? And I said, oh, yeah, of course. And he said, well, I've just been speaking at the university in such and such a city. And I said, really? Yeah. He said, yeah, I've been talking with the heads of the departments of psychology and psychiatry. Sid. I mean, honestly, it's like, get out of here. And Barb pulls out this flyer, like a brochure, out of her handbag and shows it to me. And sure enough, the name of the university, Sid's picture, speaking to the division, you know, psychology, psychiatry. I thought they had gone to a quick print shop and printed out, and I thought, to what end will they go? You know, to make me believe them. They weren't trying to make me believe them. They were just kind and unconditional in their care for me and for Ken and for all their friends, for humanity. Seeing is not believing all the time because I couldn't get that together. So, gosh, it's only a half an hour? Whoa! Oh my goodness. Well, maybe I'll open it up to questions. I don't know if that's okay to do. But, you know, like sometimes when it pours out and I've said what I've said, it's like, I'm done. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Okay. Could you stand up and then speak really clearly?
I'm just wondering, you said that you had this disbelief of Sid and things. Was there anything profound that changed your mind?
Oh, yes. It was when I had the insight in the midst of this anger I felt toward the man I'd pushed out the door. I realized for the first time that thought creates feeling. Who knew? Anybody here, did that explode for anybody here? Now you guys are so much further ahead. You know, we're fast forwarding now to 43 years ago, where even in psychology, they weren't talking a lot about thought. I don't believe. Is that right, Jack? Pretty much. It was more about like dysfunction, and we'll fix the dysfunction and techniques. And I'm not a psychologist, but from the little that I started to gather from the doctors, Pransky and Mills that came to the island, and Keith Blevins and so on, they were more into fixing dysfunction, and so there wasn't a great deal of talk about thought. And that's what opened my eyes. That's what opened the door to my own wisdom. Because for the first time, it wasn't about Sid sharing his insights with me when I would allow him. It was my own wisdom that had risen to the surface. And so I knew that was true. For the first time in my life, I knew I'm the creator of my experience in the moment. Prior to that, I had thought that my experience was a result of my conditions, my lack of, or of circumstances. You know, my lack of education, lack of money, lack of love, all that kind of stuff. That's why I was insecure, right? The way I was brought up. I didn't realize it was the way I thought about those conditions that made them, that rooted them in reality. And so when that insight came, once again, feeling. It was accompanied by this overwhelming feeling of, I'm worthy. Because when you're insecure, or at least for me, when I was insecure, I certainly didn't feel worthy. I felt unworthy. That's why I was insecure, right? Logic. And so for the first time with that phrase coming out, and it was that alive for me, thought creates feeling. You know, many insights I've had that have no content, that is just a feeling of, and then it's gone. But I know something shifted there. But it just went so fast, it's like the speed of light. So I didn't catch it, but I know there's been a shift and it'll come back one way or another. That's what turned the corner for me. And I was so infused with feeling, the feeling of worthiness and purpose. That was another thing, like, why are we here? That's what kept going over and over in my mind. In my early marriage, you know, I married just turned 18. I wasn't even 18 actually. Yeah, 2 weeks until I was 18. So I was married at 17 and had a child right away. It's like, is this all there is at the age of 22? Is this all there is to life? Is this all there is? Which that consistent refrain moved me into depression. And now one simple little phrase, one simple little insight, and I experienced home inside. And that was it. I started my journey. It certainly didn't Like that wasn't like, okay, now that's it. You know, life is a bed of roses from now on. Life is a bowl of cherries. You know, like this. But it was like, so even though I was still going my ups and downs, there was a consistent escalation of more layers of insecurity and feelings of lostness that were eliminated. All it takes is one insight. Again, history in terms of Sid. One insight he had that revealed mind, consciousness, and thought. Being shared in universities. There was a university in West Virginia that started an innate mental institute based on Sid's name. And it was in service for maybe 2 or 3 years. We went to the opening at the university. A profound event. But it created such a disturbance amongst, guess who? The departments of psychology and psychiatry. You know, they were a tad threatened, a little frightened, because all they knew was what was wrong, and let's fix it. We can fix it. Here's another piece of history. For the first time, a non-professional, an ex-welder, out of the field of psychology and psychiatry, saying there is a cure for mental illness. There is a cure for mental illness. He's not saying we can fix you. He's saying you already have within you the answer to anything you need. Now, fast forward maybe 38 years, something like that. I'm not sure how long Dr. Bill Pettit has been doing this, a long time. I remember when he and Sid first met. He came out a couple of years ago. I think it was at the Three Principles Global Conference, and stood up with Judy Sedgman and said, there is a cure to mental illness. The first time a psychiatrist has said this in the field. That's history. That's history. That's what we're all a part of. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay, and maybe a little bit more. Yes, there was someone else down there.
Yeah, it was me. But
Oh, yes.
it was a fairly frivolous question, in a way, but it's
I
one
like
that-
frivolity.
It's one that just occurred to me as you were talking, because obviously there was this wonderful connection between you two before and after. And I just wondered, did he call everyone dearie, or was this just a name for you?
No. He called his wife Pet. His wife, Barb, passed away in 1987, and it was a number of years later, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, when he married Judy, his wife now, and he called her Pet. Sometimes Sid still feels very alive to me, you know, very, very close. But he called a lot of women. I was going to say a lot of people. He didn't call the men. I don't know what he called the men. Hey, bloke. But yeah, he called a lot of women dearie. That was a pet phrase of his. Yeah. And that's part of the richness, is frivolity, fun. I struggled with that not that long ago, about 3-4 years ago. I was having a great time. I was loving my life. Sid had a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, sometimes it'd be like you could almost see him rolling on the floor with laughter. He'd get the giggles. And that was lovely to see. And he had what he called sometimes cosmic humor, where it might be serious to us, but he'd see the funny side of life in a way that we might not. And so I did, like my own humor came out, Ken's humor came out, the people around him, their humor came out, because we were feeling lighthearted. You know, we didn't have the weight of the world on our shoulders like we had previously. And so out of that lightheartedness comes humor and joie de vivre, you know, or there's a phrase, what is it? Viva la vida. What does that mean? What is it?
Live life.
Live life. Viva la vida. Yeah, live life. And in your brochure, Sid's words, you know, like enjoy what you're doing, something like that. Enjoy it even more. Like do more of that. Do more of what you enjoy. Like that. So where was I going with this? About the humor. Oh yeah, about fun. But I didn't realize I'd kind of come to a status quo in my level of, okay, I drew a line in the sand, I can have fun up to this point, but after that, it might be frivolous, not just fun, because then there was a difference for me between being frivolous and having fun. And so having fun was meeting up with my daughter and her partner in Bali, Indonesia. I thought, oh, I never dreamed I'd get an opportunity to go to Bali. Like that was way beyond my imagination. So I thought, this is great. Ken said, you go, the three of you will have a great time. I'm going fishing. And so off I went to Bali. Well, but before, they said to me, and after Bali, then we're going to go to Barcelona and other parts of Spain. And I thought, oh gosh, I would love to do that too, but that's too much. Like that's too much fun. There's my line in the sand. It's okay for Bali, but to extend my travel, change my ticket and go to Barcelona, too much, too much. That's frivolous. And so, nonetheless, I talked to Ken about it, and he said, oh, go for it, hon. You know, you've got the time, you're off, go for it. No. But I just decided on a whim I would check to see about the ticket, like how much would it cost if I changed it. Well, I couldn't get through to the airline. It's like anything that could happen that would prevent me from changing my ticket happened. In that frame of mind. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're in the frame of mind, no, I can't do this, chances are you can't do this. And then the next morning I woke up and it was still niggling at me. And usually when that happens, it's like, it's prompting me to just consider it again. Like don't work it, but just consider it again. And I thought, okay, I'll try one more time. Well, that one more time, I got through, changed my ticket, it just flowed. Yay, Barcelona, here we come. But I had such a residue, I realized after that, oh my word, like the difference between being frivolous and being fun. I had a limit, I'd come to my limit, and then I surpassed my limit, and it was absolutely fabulous. I spent 7 weeks with my daughter and her partner, and it was like one of the best times I'd ever had. You know, we bonded in a way that we hadn't ever before. It was precious. It remains precious to me. So what I, thought was frivolous turned out to be fun and profound. Now is an hour up. Now can I sit down? All right, one more question if anybody has. Yes.
Hi, Elsie. A question. In the 43 years, did you ever lose the connection with mind or apparently lose it? And
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Never lost the connection with mind. Never. None of us do. Did I get lost? Yes. Do you get the distinction? Tell me about the distinction.
Where you get up, you think you've lost it in your personal thinking, and get lost. So.
But
It's always there. But apparently...
bravo. But it's always there. Lovely. How do you know that?
You kind of know it inside.
Yeah.
That's precious. That's true knowledge when you know that, you know. And now it's even deeper for you. That's, I think, a beautiful place to end, is to know that we are mind. We are consciousness. We are thought. We are these principles in motion. So we never lose connection with ourselves. We may get lost, you know, in the journey, but we're always, always connected. And when I started to get glimmers of that, it just made a huge difference in my life. Because I get scared. You know, that's on the front page of this brochure, like if the only thing, pardon me, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their own experience, that alone would change the world. That's history. That's history. And when I realized that we never lose connection with these principles, I stopped being so afraid of my experiences. I started to see those experiences when I got lost as continuing education. And so any blame or judgment or guilt that I might harbor when I was lost, it's like, it's okay, dearie. I would talk to myself, it's okay, dearie. So it's lovely for you all to know that, and for me to know that. And I thank you all for your attention. You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience, so attentive. I appreciate that, and thank you.